My first question for you, though, since today is the last message of the last week we're going to spend in the book of Judges, does anybody remember what your reaction was when we told you we were going to study and preach through Judges? Anybody? This is like personal. There's no right or wrong answer. What did you think?
2 years of Leviticus wasn't surprising.
So you're comparing Leviticus and Judges. What do you mean by that? Come on.
It was only a year.
It was only a year. It was definitely over a year
It was 18 months in that.
in the book of Acts. It was. Long time in the book of Acts. So this has only been about 2 months in the book of Judges. I wasn't excited. I can just tell you that. I was not excited about Judges. Matt said, hey, maybe we'll go into 1st, 2nd Samuel after that, life of David. And you think, oh yeah, but Judges? Like that's not exactly whetting the appetite for King David. And I say that, and then I was thinking about this, and I kind of prayed out loud. This was the last week in the study, and it had this convicting thought, or I received, I guess, this thought of, don't ever be done studying. So just because it's the last week, maybe that is the perfect week to be ready and excited about what's coming next. And if it's 1 Samuel, great. If it's family, we're going to start a family series next week. But don't lose that appetite and that desire and hunger to teach, preach, study, breathe, chew, digest, and soak up what Scripture has to teach us. If I'm being honest, I was sitting back there even watching everybody come in the room, and I have thought about this topic, what I'm going to talk about today, and I could see your faces, and I know your stories. So things may get a little emotional here in a minute because I was just very convicted, and but I've like a rest in my soul about this because of the story. So I don't know, I'm going to jump ahead. The very last verse in the book of Judges, if you want to flip there, chapter 21 of Judges, the very last verse, verse 25, it says, there was no king. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And I thought it kind of blew my mind because I thought, man, I could get up here and I could be negative about the world today and everyone's doing their own thing and everyone's figuring everything out and there's no moral code and whatnot. And stewing, studying, praying, that is not where we're going today. And I'm excited about that. And but I think our stories are in here is what I'm getting at. Judges 20 is what we're going to start with, though, if you want to turn with me. Matt did chapter 19 and 20 last week. So let's recap. If you weren't here, let's recap that story. Anybody remember 19 and 20? It's pretty nasty, so go ahead. What was the story? Yeah. Not good. Go ahead.
It reminded me of Rahab, story of Rahab.
Why?
Well, people from the village came to the house.
To ask for help.
Give us your best.
Mm-hmm.
This is John.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to save him, he says, no, I'll keep these virgins.
Mm-hmm.
And he's concubine. And they say, no.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that is the big story. The concubine happens to his wife.
Right.
And,
You just shrugged your shoulder.
Tell me your answer, Don. What did you say just a minute ago?
I said a lot.
What did he say? Keep it filtered. What did he say?
I can keep it going because he talks about here.
Well, the last one of this man is the dead person.
Yes.
It should speak for itself.
It does speak for itself. So some of you guys were here, some of you weren't. In Judges 19, there's this really terrible thing that happens, and you think to yourself, this is totally like an allegory, like there's a lot more to this message, but the facts are, the base of the whole thing is, we think this guy really didn't care about her. That's kind of the takeaway that Matt was kind of peeking around the corner of the whole thing. His concubine, which we're not sure if it was his wife, his valued wife, or if it was a very young, almost like a sex slave, younger girl, he gives her to these men, these evil, perverted men of the city, and they attack her, they have their way with her, and then she dies as a result of her injuries. So, man, think about that in today's culture. Like, that would be a terrible crime. It is a terrible crime. And we look at that back then as it was, but we'd also think that if we heard about that today, if that happened today, he is mad. It seems like maybe not so much about her, but he's mad about the land. He dismembers her and he ships off, he mails UPS package to all these different tribes. Well, yeah. And mails it out to all these people. He FedExed it or DHL? What do you want me to say? Oh, man. So he sends it out to all these people as a way of, and I thought it was a confrontation. We never really got there. It was more of what in the world is going on here with this one guy? But it scratched the surface on chapter 20. So let's move on. This is what happens. This is the follow-up to that story. In verse 4, chapter 20, verse 4, the guy is basically giving the story again, almost like a testimony on trial almost. He's recounting what happened. So let's get past that. There's verse 11, all the men of Israel gathered together. So something bad about to happen. Verse 13, give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah. That was the town with the evil, perverted dudes. That we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel. But the Benjaminites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. So right up here, Judges 20, the reason I put on the screen civil war, there's a disagreement inside the tribes of Israel. So there's 12 tribes, and they're saying, we need to go purge the evil. And the Benjaminites are saying, nope, we're not doing that. And so there's some civil discord. So there's this interesting message there. Defend the weak. Did we hear that last week? You remember? What was it? It was on the shield, exactly. Matt got his shield up here, family crest. And there's 3 principles to being a Woodward, and one of them is defend the weak and help other people. In verse 13, there's a disagreement about whether or not we should go do this, and the Benjaminites are trying to stand up and say, no, that's not the solution. We don't need to kill more people because it's going to get into the thousands here in just a minute, thousands of deaths in this war. So verse 14, the people come together and they start mustering the men. Verse 19, the people of Israel rose early in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. So here it comes. The men of Israel, verse 20, went out to fight against them. Verse 23, the people went up and wept before the Lord until the evening. And then they inquired, shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? There's a question there. Do you see it? Should we do this? Is this really about to happen? Can you see that? Okay, there's a pause. Here we are, we're camped, things are about to get real in the morning, and they're still asking the question, is this actually going to happen? That was 25. All the people of Israel, they wept. Verse 26, they wept before the Lord and fasted that day until evening and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. What's a burnt offering and a peace offering, you remember? I think burnt offerings for sin. They're trying to come clean and say, no, nothing between us and God. And they're fasting. Tell us, we're dying here. We're grieving this moment and we're questioning, is this the right thing? So not only were they doing that by themselves, they were doing that as a community. Verse 28, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, was the minister. He was the high priest in those days. Shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? Or should we stop? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. Not only were they asking as a group, but they're calling the priest. They're calling out and saying, is this really what we're supposed to do? That's a moment of saying as a group, is this the right thing? There's a lot to that. I think we have to appreciate the struggle these guys have going into this. So that was 28. 29, ambush comes. Verse 30, the people of Israel went up against the people of Benjamin on the 3rd day and set themselves. The 3rd day, what's that mean? Huh? No, not that connection. If they're there on the 3rd day, all that means is they didn't do it on the first day. They didn't do it on the second day. That means they're waiting. That means they've gone and they've camped and they've prepared and they were mustering thousands of men, and it hasn't hit the fan yet. So keep going here. People of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city. They start the killing in verse 31. Verse 32, the second half says, let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highways. So they're trying to get them away from the stronghold. We talked about this the other day. If you have to leave your house, if you have to leave your fortress, you don't have your resources, you don't have your stuff, you can't carry all that, you're fleeing. Well, what does that leave you? Pretty vulnerable. You're out on the highway in the open. See the tactical approach here? So killing begins. It's almost like a movie. So jump all the way to verse 44. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell. All of them were men of valor. We talked about that early in this series. They turned and fled towards the wilderness. 5,000 of them were cut down then in the highway, and they were pursued hard to get them, and 2,000 men were struck down there. These dudes are on them. 18,000, and then 5, and then 2. They're gaining and they're closing in. So, verse 47, only 600 men turned and fled to the wilderness and escaped and remained there 4 months. The men of Israel, verse 48, end of the chapter, they turned back against the people. They struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, the men, the beasts or animals, all that they found, and all the towns that they found, they set on fire. You guys remember a few chapters ago, people were told to go destroy, and they didn't destroy everything. Do you remember that? You're nodding your head. They went to kill, and they said, oh, let's save some of the people or some of the women. Oh, let's save some of the animals. Like, I'll take this flock. Why not? Why destroy a perfectly good flock? Or you plunder. You take wealth or resources or money or whatever. So I noticed that this wasn't any of that. There was no holding back. It was complete destruction, even set all of that on fire. 100% done, annihilated, except for those little 600. So what do we do with that? I wrote the question, can you imagine? Because you're hit with this moment where you think you're doing the right thing, but you also have an inner turmoil that says, am I really supposed to go kill other Israelite people, this whole tribe of Benjamin? Are we supposed to be in this civil war that is absolutely going to annihilate our own people? And it doesn't sound right. Now, I'm assuming nobody in here has gotten these instructions that was, go kill somebody. However, everybody in this room has been in a crisis. In fact, I know that sometimes a crisis happens almost on a daily or a weekly basis. And not to over-exaggerate, but your crisis of a flat tire can put a damper on your day. But your crisis of conflict with somebody, or you fill in the blank. Has death ever smacked you in the face because somebody in your family or a terrible story? Disease, somebody gets hit. I just started to come up with the D's in my head. Disease, somebody gets hit with a diagnosis and you're just going, what? Where did this come from? Divorce smacks you in the face and says, what on earth just happened? And why? And now what? How do we pick up the pieces? And what's the next thing? So the conflict was what came to my mind about this, is because there was these things. You want to do the right thing, but in your gut, you have these questions, and all you have to do is take a deep breath and have patience. Because otherwise, sometimes there's nothing to do in the moment, but pause, check your gut, and ask God, is this the right thing to do? Whether it's, we just saw it, fasting, a burnt offering was a purification thing to make themselves right before God, to make sure they were doing the right thing. The reason I said grab a piece of paper is I want you to scribble down, what's your crisis? Or what's a crisis you've been through or navigated? Yourself, other people.
What's the crisis you made?
Sure. I talked to my brother on the phone yesterday. He lives in Indianapolis. He said he had just gone to a funeral, and I said, who was that? He said, Ron Fisher. I said, Ron Fisher died. That was the architect that drew this building. Architect, 60 years old, heart attack, middle of the night. I can't even shrug my shoulders about that because I know his son was in high school with me, and you guys don't know him, and I'm never going to talk to that family again. But at the same time, it just is a reminder and a wake up of like, really? And that's why I could look at you guys, and I know some of the stories and the stuff that this family right here has been through. It's a lot of crap.
I read it kind of quick yesterday. Hidden story that they went like 3 times down. Like they fought and lost, and then
And then,
but that's a lot of like going to God. You know?
yeah.
So are they getting the right message from God?
Are they getting the right message? And you think you're doing the right thing, and you keep questioning. And that's why I pointed out the day 3 thing. Like, really? We tried, and it didn't happen. We're not getting the results here.
What's the left hand of the soda again?
I don't understand that, so I didn't point it out to you.
It never really makes sense.
I know. I tried to figure that out. I don't know.
We talked about once before, the big convention on the left hand. And, I never got too far the last explanation for Matt, so I just wondered what your thoughts were.
And it doesn't make sense.
Reading that, and he said that Andy's out, right? That's what we went with the other guy.
Well, the other guy was saying that.
Yeah.
But these guys, it points to the fact that because they were marksmen, like there was something strategic about the way they fought.
It's,
Also, it could be, as you know, a lot of the words in the text were from a different time, and they had different meanings. Just to give you an example, when I was over in Saudi Arabia, all the Irish and Catholic, that still going on today. People would say, when you talk pretty much wrong, please talk about Catholics and say, they need to put their right foot. No, I had no idea what that meant, right? It really didn't, they put their right foot. So that meant the Catholics, so it could be something like that, just crazy, but I'm just saying.
yeah.
I think it also raises the question of, they believe that, okay, God wants us to go against our brothers. Well, they get beat down 20,000 out, they were beat theirs. Then, okay, we go again, so back and ask God, and we didn't get this right. We cry out to God, still, same answer.
Go.
Still, we gotta do it again.
Yeah.
Boom, we got another 18,000 down. I mean, I think, and then it's not until the 3rd time.
Mhm.
And I think it raises the question of how often does doing God's will in your life, or what doing God's will is in your life, lead to something you didn't expect to happen, something maybe even harder.
Mhm.
And you ask the question, okay, wait a minute, am I on the right track? Is this real? So often we think it has to be a positive conclusion
Mhm.
in order to do God's will, when many times we're right exactly where God wants us.
Yeah.
One thing I understand is the patience thing, and that is probably, for me, that's probably things, sometimes, first of all, whenever I react to these things, it's probably wrong.
Right.
Second of all, when I do go to God sometimes, I have this preconceived answer that I'm looking for. I have not really honestly waited to hear what he has to say. I want him to say what I want to hear. So, possibly the first couple times, they weren't hearing what God really said, they were hearing what they wanted to hear, and then the third time, they finally understood what God was trying to say. And that's the way it was for me.
Let's,
Not until the 3rd time it says when God was with them, right? God was with them the 3rd time.
on the 3rd attempt.
Yeah, but you're not going to win unless I'm with them and glorify me. Genesis, it specifically said God was with them on the 3rd.
I was just following up on something you were saying, you think about D-words, gas, the wars, the D.
Right.
And I'm talking about the vision,
Yeah, that sucks.
like, whether it be in family or at work, like the vision of doing what's right, and everybody's doing wrong, everybody's doing the easy things. You know they're doing wrong things, the right things.
Yeah. This is the picture, Allie, the picture of the slide, this is exactly that. So I took this picture a couple weeks ago. Nice warm day on the beach, right? Okay. Gray skies, terrible. Waves, not pleasant looking, not like attractive that you want to go jump in. The sand was even cold, okay? The temperature was cold. The wind was cold. This was Easter morning. Get up and go out to the beach when you want to see the sunrise, because there's this warm feeling that says, I'm going out to be as close to nature as I can right now because I'm looking for God on Easter morning. And I don't mean to make this too cheesy because of Easter, okay? I know it's just a day on the calendar. But just think about the feeling. Of all the days in the world that you think I'm going to be up early in the morning, this is what you're met with. Is that this feeling right here? Of division, of going, what is going on? There was not one other person on the beach besides this little group. Do you ever feel like you're alone and there's nobody else that's joining you and you're not doing the right thing and you start to question? And I even had this thought of, what is this one brown bird doing here? And I'm telling you, nobody else, no other bird, no other animal. And I actually thought to myself, and I said this out loud, God, is our world at times, is there a desire in all of us for you to do the right thing and for your way to happen on this earth? Does even your creation want that? This one bird, is there a bird out? Do birds and animals and mankind, are we all looking for you? And sometimes you just don't show up. It was cold, it felt alone out there, and I thought, this sucks. Why did I even get out of bed? I want to pull the covers back over and hide because he's not showing up. That was the feeling. Again, I don't mean to make it cheesy about that day, but it smacked me in the face. Sometimes it feels like he's not there at all. And then the next picture, that was sunset later that day. And Everly took the picture and sent it to our family text, and it was like, those are the moments that we celebrate, but we don't always celebrate and acknowledge the previous picture, right? Because it's hard, it's rough. It is, and there's no way about that. It's kind of exactly what a couple of you were saying. Yeah.
This may not answer this one, but is there anything that was said about what they feel about that?
Yes.
That's
Chapter 21, verse 3. They said, God, O Lord God of Israel, why has this happened, that today there should be a whole tribe lacking? Verse 4, the next day the people rose early and built an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. The word early stood out to me. I thought, is there another meaning to that? And there's not. It's just the obvious fact it was a priority. I mean, it's this, I'm sorry, not obvious fact, but it's the same idea. It's a desire to meet God and to say, we have to move on. Now, you have to think about maybe that was afternoon, maybe it wasn't morning, I don't know, but the early word still says they were still pursuing him to say, let's still meet with God, let's still do these two offerings because we're still pursuing, but they were still grieving. I'm not pointing at that, I'm pointing at this. Verse 3, they were still asking and questioning that. And I take that to say, weren't they still grieving with some sadness that said, why did this have to happen? We just lost all these people and a whole tribe. They know that was the whole picture. Like there was a brokenness in the shalom wholeness. It was gone. So don't forget how big of a part grief is in that process. Turn the page, verse 15. The people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach for them. And the grief turns into more of a practical, verse 16, what shall we do for wives? That's where I wrote the word practical down. They were wondering, there were 600 men that fled to the wilderness. You remember that verse? And they wanted to know, what do we do? How do we repopulate this group? How do we keep going? And so I wanted to point that out to you because sometimes we don't know what to do. And sometimes your grief and your emotions, you're just asking, like, is there something tangible I can do? When someone dies that what's the customary thing to do? What's everybody think to do when someone dies? Well, whatever you can. Give me something specific. I can keep it. They cook food. There's the first one, especially in Louisiana. Number one, cook food. What's the second thing? They cry, they grieve, and they say, I'm sorry. Exactly. Sorry for your loss. I have heard that hundreds of times in just the last couple of years. What's the third thing? Funeral happens? Send flowers. There you go. Some people do throw a party, you're right. But they send flowers. That's a customary thing to do. And it doesn't matter if it's a small arrangement, if it's a small little plant, or if it's a big old spray, right? That's what you do, those three things. I'm sorry for your loss, cook some food, take something to the house, lasagna, whatever, and that. So there's grief. So often all of this turns into this process, and we know this is a long process, but you feel like you have to do something. These guys, when they were still grieved, but they said, now what do we do? And they turned to the practical. Let's get them wives and let's repopulate. And so the 600 grabbed 400 and they figure it out. Okay, this whole thing boils down to this. Verse 23, the people of Benjamin did so, the instructions that they were given. They took their wives according to their number from the dancers, blah, blah. Then they went and returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. The people, verse 24, the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. They went from there, every man to his inheritance. Well, when you hear people talk about inheritance these days, what comes to mind? Money, definitely. And property. Could be a keepsake, an heirloom, furniture. It could be land, right, all that stuff. And then this starts, right? The bickering. I didn't get this, and you got that, and mom wanted this, and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you remember, if you guys have been here for the study of Judges, and some of you haven't, I get that. But in this, several chapters ago, there was instruction given to every tribe. And it was, this tribe gets this piece of land, this tribe gets this. You remember that? Okay, I think it was actually chapter 3 or 4. You remember where the guy, this is one of the first weeks, the guy is, the group of men are told, whoever can go win the battle can have my daughter. You remember that? Okay, the guy wins, he goes and gets the girl, and then do you remember what the girl said? Father, if I'm going to do this, give us the land with the springs. She made a specific request that said, if we're getting this piece of property, give us the springs with it. So that they, I don't know if that for farming or whatever, but then another family, another tribe got this little section over here, right? Anyway, inheritance. They went and returned to their inheritance. What the word inheritance to me means, take all of this. This is the hand you were dealt. Now go figure it out. They weren't all the same. They weren't all equal. Those 12 offerings was, this is a piece of desert land. This is a little oasis over here. This has springs. This one doesn't. It's not all the same. Well, everybody's situation in here, everybody's crisis, every situation that we face is different. But that's the hand that you were dealt. You pick up the pieces and you try to make things happen. The next word says in verse 23, they returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the towns. This whole chapter, for me, came to realization when I read the word rebuilt. I looked it up to know what does that mean, what's the picture it's painting, and it's used 376 times. And it means the typical stuff that you would think of. It means to restore, to repair, and reestablish. I'm assuming if you scribbled something on your paper a minute ago, you can look at it and you can think about the crisis that you've been through, and you can think about some ways that your family or yourself or even your faith has been reestablished, rebuilt, and repaired. It also, at one definition of it or translation of it was allowed to continue. So when you thought, life sucks, I don't even know how I can go on, that word means allowed to continue. Some of us might have said the phrase, because I've heard this phrase at work, I guess, if I was with somebody that went through a really bad thing and they said, I don't know how I can go on. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Allowed to continue. If you will, somebody look up Genesis 16 And somebody else flip to Genesis 30, please.
You know, Aaron, through these conflicts, right? Not necessarily the outcome of the conflict, but the outcome of the system in the conflict. You know, how are we, you know, that after conflict? Someone in the New Testament talks about that, you know, that our works, right, would be like burning fire. And only ones that are of God that will be left.
Mhm.
You know? And I find that, you know, there's ways in the world gives us that we can handle these conflicts, and there's ways that, you know, you can do certain things, right? But there's also ways that we learn from God.
Mhm.
And then in the midst of these conflicts, you know, like they wouldn't pray, right?
Mhm.
They fasted. And I noticed like on the third time their battle was different than the other.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I believe that, you know, when we press into God those times, right? We have to have the patience, like you said, you know, especially when you come into the last fall, when we talk about the restored, you know, and that, because even after Katrina, we still rebuild it today.
Mhm.
It doesn't happen instantly.
Right.
And so, when we get that conflict, it's thinking of our time with God to be restored, and we say, well, okay, I need to get up in the morning, now I'm up in the morning, when I get before our relationship begins to strengthen, begins to get better,
Sure.
begins to, because it's not, then we're like a dog that gets returned to stop running.
Sure.
You know, go back and do one of those things. And I would think that, I really believe, right, that I'm out here trying to restore things with God, doing things differently than I did before, that I learned from my mistakes and so forth, right? Then I am just out here trying to do things without Him and my own natural abilities.
Absolutely.
You know,
But a lot of-
that's intentions.
Sure, but a lot of times those conflicts, those crises, make us go to places we've never been before, so you're kind of left bewildered. But
Especially when we can't do, when we cannot fix
Well,
ourselves.
right, and it goes back to what Deb said earlier. Sometimes you're in a situation where it's not how you planned, I think, and you have to go about it a different way. So I was standing right on the other side of that wall 10 or 12 years ago, and a guy who had an adult daughter said to me, I was asking him how it's going. Well, she had met a guy and they were getting married. And I said, well, are you excited? How's it going? And he said, it's not how I drew it up. Okay? Yeah, some of you dads can appreciate that. No exaggeration. Less than a year later, I was standing in the exact same spot with a different dad. And he said to me, when I asked him the same question, because his daughter was getting married, and he said, it's not how I had it drawn up. Okay? Genesis 16, verse 2. Somebody read that.
Was there ever a conversation where you asked that question and you gave a different answer?
Coming from the dad whose kids are married now. Genesis 16, 2. I'm terrified of that day. Uncharted territory for sure. Somebody read that verse.
Sarah said that Abram, see, you know, they kept me from bearing children. Please go into my female servant. It might be that I am built up by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah.
Sarah gets impatient. She wants a baby. And so she turns to her maid, and not a concubine, but her maid, right? And says, here's a solution. Go have a baby that I may obtain children, is another translation. Somebody else read Genesis 30, verse 3.
Then she said, here's my servant, Bilhah, go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her.
That even I may have children through her. Take a wild guess what word is used. And it was in Matt's translation. It's rebuilt. I say it was used 376 times in here. It's the word banah. So the next time, I looked at a banana, I was like, banana, no, that's what I thought. Okay, so you'll never forget now, rebuilt is banana, okay? It means repurpose and to allow to continue. So think about this. As a woman in those days, they were supposed to have children, right? To continue the family lineage. When it's not happening and things aren't working out with you and your spouse, and we know how old Sarah was getting at this point, right? And you need a solution and you come up with your own plan and you try to push your agenda a little bit because things aren't working out. She said, take my maidservant and have a baby that I may obtain children, that I may be allowed to continue, that I may be rebuilt as a person, because at this point, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, which is have offspring. That's the point that I wrote down what Deb said a second ago. Sometimes you build or you rebuild in a way that you didn't expect. It showed me that the word rebuilt or building can be literal. The people had to go back to their towns that were completely burned down, and they had to rebuild. It can be literal, but it could also be figurative in a way that you feel completely destroyed or completely torn down, or your relationship with somebody, whether it's your spouse, your kids, your extended family, coworkers, or whatever. Rebuilding is sometimes very, very figurative because it's emotional, it's inside, and it's spiritual, and you're asking all these questions. It's not always brick and mortar is what I'm saying, like Katrina. Katrina was a lot of structures, right? Those have almost all been rebuilt. But that generation that experienced Katrina, including our whole nation when they saw what took place, still has not been rebuilt 20 years later. Not been rebuilt completely. And you guys know what I mean. There's figurative and there's literal. But back to that reality, sometimes you build or rebuild in a way that you didn't expect. And those two guys, those two dads standing on the other side of the wall over there was an example of that. All right, almost done. So a couple weeks ago, if you were here for Passover dinner, we had a pallet wall over here, right? That we took pictures in front of and it was decorated. And Shauna got a couple pallets and was talking about them and making a plan. And she was looking at them and saying, well, this one's this size and this one's this color, and started staining them and trying to figure out how all these pieces went together, trying to build this object. So there was one of them that was too long. So I cut the pallet board off. And you can see what part of the pallet this is, right? It's the one that goes up and down. It creates the height in the pallet and forklifts and forks and all that. Well, I learned a little while back from Bruce that a lot of times the vertical part is made out of oak. And a lot of times the slats that go on top are pine. And pine, if you throw it in a fire, pine's usually got sap in it. It burns different than oak because oak is a hardwood. The top pieces are oftentimes splintered. They get busted up, and you replace them. This thing, I don't know if you can see it, but it's got nails that are bent over. It's got nails that have been shot in, and they missed the top of it. And then I looked at it closer because they didn't have this many boards on it. Boards have been ripped off, and then they've been put back on. And then I glanced at it, and I realized that I didn't do this. There's nails still in here that have been cut off, and then new boards put back on. I don't know why this board was made into a pallet, because it was a tree at some point, and this oak wasn't made into some nice shelf or dining room table or whatever. It got the pallet assignment. And it's got a knot right here, it's kind of ugly. But I wanted to take this, when I picked it up and when I cut it off the pallet, I was gonna throw it in the campfire wood pile. And I looked at it and I thought, man, it would be nice, you can still see the end grain there. It's just a piece of oak. And I thought it'd be nice to maybe get rid of these nails and maybe engrave something on here, or maybe, you stain it for a nameplate or something. But I stopped for a second because I knew it had to come up here and kind of tell a story. When you stop and think, this thing has been beaten and abused and reused and reapplied. Who knows how many warehouses or trucks this pallet went to, or what kind of stuff went on top of it. You don't know how it was used, but it was reused and it was reused and it was reused. Every single person in here has got a story, and you might feel abused and beat down, and you didn't know why. You had to have something ripped away from you and reapplied, and you don't know maybe what the future holds. But you're not done, because you still have to get up the next morning and still face the practical, and still keep going somehow. But if you stop and take a look back, hindsight, rowboat, right, tells you don't know how the story's going to end, but it's not done. And again, just because you feel like you've been knocked around a few times, you still got a purpose. And I'm glad and thankful that we get to the end of this book of Judges, and I'm humbled because this is not where I expected to be. Matt said there's some literal stuff in here that happened in history. There's a lot of figurative stuff that is a story and allegory that talks about God's character and where we are and where we find ourselves based on what people did. So I hope that it's been a chance for you to work through your journal, work through your story, ask yourself some stuff, and obviously through all of that, worship God for who He is and what He's done in your life. I think Christ obviously shows us through Holy Spirit prompting you and saying, check this, look at this, notice this. And it's been 3 months now that we've been studying. I hope that the book of Judges has been something good for you in your gut. And the good news is it's not done yet. Okay? Let's pray. Father, sometimes we don't know what the Murph is going on. And we just try to scribble some stuff up on the board. You know what we go through: inner conflict, sleepless nights, tears, questions, doubt. Thank you for being a God that listens, that loves, and that keeps on going before us with second chances. We know Book of Lamentations, new mercies come in the morning. So today we just want to worship you for who you are, and we want to keep going. Please help us with that. Amen.